Dear readers, this tale runs longer than our usual fare, but trust me when I say it's worth every moment of your time. Settle in and enjoy. Chapter 1: The Burning Steel Coffin. Death by fire had never crossed Jack Harris's mind during his 32 years on this earth. Combat had shown him plenty of ways to die: bodies torn apart by bullets, limbs scattered by IEDs, corpses rotting in bomb craters. Yet here he was, trapped inside a burning M1 Abrams tank somewhere in the Iraqi desert, finally understanding that some deaths are worse than others. Fire ranked pretty high on that list. Lady Luck, however, had different plans for him that day. Sand. The damned stuff was everywhere, grinding between his teeth, infiltrating every fold of his uniform, clogging the targeting systems. Desert warfare meant fighting the sand first, enemies second. That's what Jack figured as he guided his tank across the scorched wasteland 40 miles south of Baghdad. The thermometer in the crew compartment read 122 Fahrenheit, and the sun hadn't even peaked yet. Contact, 10 o'clock. His gunner's voice crackled through the headset like a rifle shot. Jack pressed his eye to the scope. Through the thermal imaging, dark silhouettes darted between ruined buildings. 3 figures. No, make that 4. One of them shouldered something long and cylindrical. RPG. Jack's warning merged with the thunder of the launcher. The rocket-propelled grenade carved a fiery arc through the air. Jack watched it tumble toward the frontal armor, his mind calculating trajectories with battlefield precision. The angle was wrong, not enough kinetic energy to penetrate at that approach. He miscalculated. The impact felt like Satan himself had taken a sledgehammer to the hull. The tank lurched like a wounded animal. Something cracked, hissed, and acrid black smoke flooded the compartment. Hydraulics are shot. Rodriguez, the driver, fought to be heard over the shrieking alarm. Commander, we're... The second hit cut him short. Same spot. This time the armor gave way. Jack felt the heat slam into him like someone had thrown napalm in his face. Fire engulfed the crew compartment instantly. What followed blurred into nightmare: screaming crew, crackling flames, the stench of burning flesh. Jack hammered at the commander's hatch, jammed solid. He pounded with fists, shoulder, head, nothing. At some point he realized he was screaming. Not from pain, strangely, there wasn't any yet. Pure terror drove those screams. His body moved on autopilot, hands fumbling for the emergency release lever. One pull, two. On the third try, the hatch gave. The desert's furnace heat felt cool compared to the inferno inside. Jack tumbled out, rolling down the hull. His clothes were burning. The training kicked in, drop and roll. He rolled through the sand, feeling the flames reluctantly release their prey. Gunfire chattered nearby. Bullets whined past. But Jack heard none of it. Consciousness mercifully fled, shielding him from the agony that was surely coming. He woke in a military hospital in Germany. White walls, antiseptic smell, beeping medical equipment, and pain, the kind that made you want to howl like a wounded animal. Burns covered 40% of his body. Ironically, his face had mostly escaped, saved by the fire-resistant mask. Everything else. "You're lucky, Captain," the doctor said while changing dressings. "Another couple seconds in that tin can, and we wouldn't be having this conversation." Lucky? Funny word. Jack stared at the ceiling, thinking about Rodriguez, about Peters the gunner, about Johnson the loader. They hadn't been lucky. They'd stayed in that burning steel coffin in the desert. He'd survived. Now he had to figure out how to live with that. But this was just the beginning. Over the following weeks, Jack discovered he couldn't handle enclosed spaces. Elevators, small rooms, even cars, everything triggered crushing panic attacks. The military shrinks had a name for it: post-traumatic stress disorder. Jack called it his personal hell. When it became clear he'd never return to active duty, they offered him an instructor position at the armor school. At least there he could escape outside whenever needed. But Jack knew it wasn't enough. He needed something different, something opposite. That's when he remembered Alaska, land of eternal cold and endless horizons. A place with no sand, no heat, no cramped spaces, where a man could start fresh. He didn't know yet that this decision would lead him into a different kind of war. A war not against enemies, but against betrayal. That someday he'd have to choose between fire and ice, between vengeance and forgiveness, between past and future. But all that lay ahead. For now he just lay in his hospital bed, watching snow fall outside the window, thinking about cold. Clean, pure, white cold that would forever heal the burns in his soul. Chapter 2, Starting Over. Fairbanks welcomed Jack Harris with 30 below temperatures and a blizzard. He stood in the airport terminal, clutching his worn duffel bag, watching snow devils dance beyond the massive windows. Nothing like the Iraqi desert. No sand, no heat, no ghosts of his burned crew haunting him these past 8 months. His pocket held a printout advertising a business for sale, snowmobile rentals on the edge of town. The owner, Old Man Johnson, was retiring and wanted a quick sale. The price was laughable, way below market, perfect for a fresh start. Tank Commander, huh? Old Johnson squinted at the scars on Jack's arms. They sat in the rental shop's cramped office, surrounded by maps, spare parts, and yellowed magazines. What brings you to our neck of the woods? Most vets head somewhere warm after their service. Maybe that's exactly why I'm here, Jack shrugged. Had my fill of heat. No point mentioning the nightmares, the suffocating panic attacks in closed spaces, or waking up to phantom smells of burning metal. The deal took less than an hour. Johnson seemed as eager to unload the business as Jack was to buy it. They shook hands, and by evening Jack owned a fleet of 12 used Yamaha snowmobiles and a small shack that served as an office. The first weeks passed in endless tinkering with machines. The snowmobiles were in worse shape than they'd appeared. Jack spent his days in the garage, replacing clutch belts, adjusting carburetors, patching torn tracks. Something meditative about working on engines while blizzards howled outside the walls. Customers trickled in slowly. Solo tourists at first, then small groups. They liked the quiet owner with the scars, gave the place character. Jack enjoyed teaching them to handle the machines, especially when they rode out into the tundra where nothing existed but white silence stretching to the horizon. Out there, he finally felt free. Emily entered his life on a raw February morning. She walked into the office wearing an enormous parka, backpack stuffed with equipment, asking to rent a snowmobile for a week. "University of Alaska," she said, showing her ID. "I study permafrost melt dynamics. Need to reach several sites for measurements." Jack shook his head. "Not alone, safety rules." "Then come with me," she smiled, and something in that smile made his heart skip. "You can tell me about the terrain. I'm new here." They spent a week together, crisscrossing the snowy tundra. Emily turned out nothing like his image of scientists, no boring seriousness. She laughed at his jokes, marveled at his ability to read animal tracks in the snow, and in the evenings, inside the tent, told amazing stories about permafrost, about ancient ice holding secrets of millennia. "Know what's beneath us?" she'd ask, tracing her finger across the map. "Entire methane lakes frozen millions of years ago. If they thaw, it'll change the whole world." Jack watched her tousled dark hair, cheeks flushed from cold, eyes burning with enthusiasm, and realized he was falling in love. For the first time since Iraq, he felt truly alive. Their first kiss happened at the Northern Light, a small coffee shop in downtown Fairbanks. A blizzard raged outside while inside it smelled of fresh pastries and cinnamon. Emily was explaining her research, gesturing wildly and constantly adjusting her sliding glasses. Then she stopped mid-sentence. "What?" Jack asked. "The way you look at me." "How's that?" "Like I'm some kind of miracle." "Maybe you are." He leaned across the table and kissed her. Simple and natural, like he'd done it 1,000 times before. The wedding 6 months later brought out the whole town. Even old Johnson flew up from his Florida retirement home. Lots of snow, laughter, and dancing. Then he appeared Professor Michael Stone, Emily's research advisor. "My best student," he said, shaking Jack's hand. Something in his voice felt off, some note Jack couldn't quite identify. "I hope you realize what a treasure you've got." Jack nodded, his arm around Emily's shoulders. He didn't notice how she tensed when the professor appeared, didn't see the quick glance they exchanged, didn't think twice about how often Emily mentioned Professor Stone in conversations afterward. Their life together flowed steady and happy. Days, Jack ran the rental business. Evenings, they sat by the fireplace, making plans, dreaming of the future. Sometimes she left for field research, usually a week or two. She'd return tired but satisfied, carrying data and samples. Then came the call that would change everything. An ordinary phone call on a frigid December morning. "Honey," Emily's voice sounded anxious. "Remember that new expedition I mentioned? We have a problem. Our driver came down with pneumonia, and we need to leave day after tomorrow." Jack listened as she explained the research importance, the grant deadlines, how his tank driving experience made him the perfect candidate for operating the tracked vehicle. He listened and agreed, never suspecting this conversation marked the beginning of a journey to a new hell. A hell that would make the burning tank seem like child's play. Chapter 3: Dark Dealings. Light burned behind Professor Stone's office door, always burning, even at these late hours when the rest of the university had long gone dark. Emily smoothed her wind-tousled hair before knocking. Their meetings always happened at night, when the hallways held no prying eyes or ears. "Come in, my dear," Stone's voice flowed smooth and soft, like velvet over glass. The office smelled of coffee and expensive tobacco. The professor stood at the window, gazing at the snow-covered campus. At 65, he still maintained what society matrons called distinction: tall, straight-backed, silver hair arranged perfectly. A true academic, the university's pride and joy. If they only knew. Documents ready, Emily placed a folder of reports on the desk. "I added the new equipment data." Stone smiled, and that smile sent a chill down her spine. Once, as a student, she'd found his smile charming. Now she saw the predator beneath. "Ah, our new equipment." He opened the folder. "State-of-the-art climate control systems, automated weather stations, spectrometers. Everything looks absolutely perfect on paper." "On paper," Emily echoed. She remembered how it started. Second year special glaciology seminar. Stone noticed her immediately, the only student asking truly probing questions. Extra sessions began, joint projects. And then, "You know, the key to science is working the grants system," he'd told her once. "No money means no research, and getting money requires creativity." The creativity proved simple as all brilliant schemes. The university received federal grants for permafrost research, millions for equipping remote stations, monitoring systems, expeditions. The fact that most equipment existed only in reports. Who'd trekked to the Arctic Circle to count sensors? 3 million this quarter, Stone tapped the figures. "Not bad, right? Of course, half goes to our friends on the grant committee, but still." Emily nodded. She'd long since learned not to think about the sums, just as she'd learned not to think about the ancient Soviet instruments still standing at the stations instead of modern equipment, about how they fabricated data with stone, about how. Lost in thought, his hand settled on her shoulder, "Thinking of your husband." Jack, something twisted inside at the thought of him. Honest, straightforward Jack, who saw her as a dedicated scientist, who took pride in her research. "No," she lied, "just tired." Stone leaned closer. He smelled of whiskey and the same cologne from 15 years ago when it all began. Perhaps then. The kiss felt routine, almost mechanical, like everything else that followed on the wide leather couch. Afterward, buttoning her blouse, Emily caught her reflection in the window, 37 years old, still playing the smitten student. But what choice did she have? She was in too deep, knew too much. About the expedition, Stone had returned to his desk as if nothing had happened. We need to install new equipment at Station Polaris. Write off the old gear, update documentation. You know the drill. Yes, but Emily hesitated. There's a problem. Steve, our driver, is hospitalized, pneumonia. So, without a driver, we can't. Find a replacement. He didn't even look up from the papers. We're on deadline. If we don't do this now, we'll have to wait until spring, and spring brings audits. Emily bit her lip. The thought came suddenly, chilling her to the bone. Jack, she whispered, he's former Armor Corps. He can handle the tracked vehicle. Now Stone looked at her, a long, studying gaze. Your husband, new notes entered his voice. That's an interesting idea, very interesting. But it's risky, she added quickly. He might suspect something. Or it's an opportunity. Stone stood, approached her. Think about it. The three of us go out there. He sees the real station, understands what's happening. And then, an accident. So many accidents happen in the Arctic, especially to inexperienced people. What? Emily recoiled. You can't. I can do anything, dear. His smile widened. So can you. Isn't that why we work so well together? Besides, haven't you ever thought about starting fresh, without this little lie between us? Emily stayed silent. Thoughts swirled about Jack, about money, about how deep she'd sunk into all this, about how easily people vanish in Alaska's endless snows. Call him, Stone returned to the window. Tell him we need his help, that it's important for your work, for science. He loves you, doesn't he? He'll agree. She pulled out her phone. Her fingers trembled as she dialed. Outside, snow fell, large, heavy flakes blanketing the campus in a white shroud. Somewhere far away, in their cozy house on the edge of town, Jack probably sat by the fireplace, waiting for her return, never suspecting that every word of their coming conversation was already scripted by another man. And remember, dear, Stone's voice barely carried over the dialing tone. In science, as in love, there's no room for sentiment, only results. Chapter 4, Journey North. The tracked vehicle, Haglund, looked like a giant orange caterpillar frozen in the cold. Jack circled the machine, checking every detail with habits ingrained through years of service. 40 below turned metal brittle as glass and rubber hard as stone. Any small thing could cost lives out here. Everything okay? Emily's voice came unexpectedly close. She stood nearby, bundled in her Arctic parka. In the rising sun's light, her breath formed silver clouds. Think so? Jack tapped the track. Strange, though. According to the paperwork, this machine's nearly new, but the wear patterns. All those numbers in documents, she waved dismissively. You know bureaucrats. Main thing is it runs. Professor Stone appeared last when the sun had fully cleared the horizon. His movements were precise, practiced, clearly not his first expedition. A backpack stuffed with instruments, thermos of coffee, tablet with maps. Ready for adventure, he smiled, extending his hand to Jack. Hope your tank skills won't be needed, though anything can happen in the Arctic. Something in his tone made Jack's instincts stir. He couldn't explain what exactly, just that military sense that had saved him so many times in Iraq suddenly coiled like a disturbed snake. But he pushed the feeling aside. After all, this was just a scientific expedition. The vehicle departed at exactly 8 o'clock. Jack sat at the controls, getting used to the machine. Lighter than a tank, but the same basic principle: tracks are tracks. Behind him in the living compartment, Emily and the professor arranged equipment. The first hours passed in relative quiet, just engine roar and snow crunching under the tracks. Sometimes Stone approached the cabin, pointed out directions on the map, explained something about the route. He smelled of expensive cologne, a strange, out-of-place scent here. By noon they were far beyond cell coverage. The endless white desert stretched in all directions. No trees, No hills, just snow and sky merging at the horizon into one blurred line. "Beautiful, isn't it, Jack?" Emily settled beside the driver's seat. "I'm amazed every time. Such absolute emptiness. It's mesmerizing. Nobody for hundreds of miles except us." "Yeah," Jack glanced at the instruments. "Just cold, 52 below outside." "Oh, that's still warm," she laughed. "Wait till we reach the station in a couple days." She cut herself off, and something in her voice made Jack's alertness spike again. He turned to her, but she'd already moved back to the professor, who was rapidly writing something on his tablet. Day gave way to twilight, twilight to polar night. They continued moving, navigating by GPS and instrument readings. Jack held course due north, toward where Station Polaris supposedly sat according to the coordinates. "Maybe stop for the night," he suggested when the clock showed 9 p.m. "I've been at the controls 16 hours. "No," Stone answered too quickly. "I mean, better to keep moving. There's a good spot to camp about 50 miles ahead, I know it well." Again that feeling, like a quiet bell ringing at the edge of consciousness. Jack checked the rearview mirror. The professor whispered urgently to Emily. She nodded, biting her lip. They reached the campsite after midnight. A small hollow, sheltered from wind by snow drifts. It really was convenient, as if someone had specifically prepared this stop. While Jack shut down the engine and checked systems, Stone and Emily quickly organized dinner. Canned goods, crackers, hot tea from thermoses. They ate in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. "I'll take first watch," Stone volunteered when dinner was done. "You two rest. Tomorrow will be a hard day." Jack settled on his camp cot, listening to wind howl outside the vehicle's walls. Emily lay nearby, but he sensed she wasn't sleeping. Her breathing was too quick, too tense. "Something wrong?" he whispered. "Everything's fine," her whisper trembled. "Just nervous before an important experiment." She turned to face the wall, clearly ending the conversation. Jack closed his eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Thoughts churned: Emily's strange behavior, the professor's odd exchanges with her, his too hasty answers. Outside the vehicle, the polar night howled, indifferent to human fears and doubts. Somewhere out there in that snowy wasteland, Station Polaris waited, and something told Jack that what he'd find there would change everything. Professor Stone sat in the cabin, staring into darkness. His fingers absently stroked something in his parka pocket. After all, accidents in the Arctic were so common, especially when carefully planned, weren't they? Chapter 5: The Traitor's Scheme. Research Station Polaris emerged from the snowy haze suddenly. One moment there was just gray ahead, the next a dark silhouette materialized. Jack reduced speed, peering through the windshield. Something was very wrong, completely wrong. This is the modern research station." He couldn't hide the disbelief in his voice. Before them stood a tilting wooden barracks, half buried in snow. The walls, blackened with age, barely held on rusted supports. Cracked glass darkened the narrow windows. A bent antenna jutted forlornly above the roof, the kind Jack had seen on abandoned Soviet bases in Iraq. "Maybe we're off course." He turned to Emily, but she looked away. "No," Stone's voice rang unexpectedly firm. "This is the right station. Park by the entrance." Inside the barracks, the air hung stale and cold. It reeked of mold, rust, and something else, that particular smell of abandonment you can't mistake for anything else. Flashlight beams pulled ancient instruments from the darkness, covered in thick layers of dust and frost. Jack slowly circled the room, illuminating every corner. Here stood a weather station, antique, with rusted dials. There sat a rack of sensors, faded Cyrillic labels still visible. All this equipment had clearly been here for decades. "I don't understand." He stopped at the central console. "The documents mention modern equipment, state-of-the-art climate control systems, automated weather stations, spectrometers. Where is it all?" Emily and Stone stayed silent. In the quiet, Only wind howling through gaps between boards could be heard. Jack pulled out a crumpled printout, a copy of the latest station equipment report. Here, he jabbed at the lines. Installed last year, $3 million just for equipment. Where is it? Jack, Emily took a step toward him, but Stone stopped her with a gesture. You're observant, Captain, the professor smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. Military habit of noticing details, or just natural suspicion. What's going on here? Jack felt the familiar surge building inside, the same that always preceded combat. Science is happening, Captain. Real science. Stone strolled around the room, lovingly caressing the old instruments. Know how much it costs to maintain a station like this, how much money real research needs, and those bureaucrats in Washington. They want reports, numbers, pretty graphs. They don't care where the data comes from. You're falsifying results. It wasn't a question. We're optimizing resources, Stone corrected. Yes, the equipment's old, but it works, and the budget difference goes to real research, to what truly matters. To what? Your offshore accounts. Emily whimpered. Jack turned to her. She stood pressed against the wall, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't mean to. It all started so long ago. And then Jack understood. Understood everything, her frequent expeditions, Stone's strange hints at the wedding, those looks they exchanged. Nausea rose in his throat. How long? His voice came out hoarse. How many years have you? 15, Stone answered for her. Since she was a student, talented girl, in every sense. He said it with such condescending tenderness that pure, animal rage washed over Jack. He stepped forward, but Stone proved faster. A pistol appeared in his hand, small, neat, completely at odds with a scientist's image. Let's not get heated, Captain. The professor tiredly sank onto a creaky chair. Have a seat. Let's talk like adults. Jack remained standing, arms crossed. Emily nervously fiddled with her parka zipper. Yes, we use old equipment, Stone spoke calmly, as if lecturing. Yes, we report new equipment. The difference supports our research staff salaries. By the way, ever wonder how your wife affords such expensive expedition gear, or where the money for that snowmobile business came from? Jack felt the ground drop away beneath him. He slowly turned to Emily. Is this true? Jack, she stammered. That money went to a good cause, to our future, to your business. Which I thought was honestly earned. His voice sounded hollow. Listen, Captain, Stone rose. We're all doing our jobs here. Yes, not entirely legal. But was the war you served in legal? Weren't billions stolen through military contracts there? At least we're spending money on science. On science, Jack laughed bitterly. On rusted instruments half a century old. Heavy silence filled the room. Only wind howled through cracks and old wiring crackled. What now? Jack finally asked. Now we finish our work here, Stone pulled out his tablet. Fill out reports, check equipment. By the way, we need your help. See this point on the map. There's a GPS beacon that needs checking. Not far, couple miles. And if I refuse, if I decide to report this? You won't, Stone answered calmly. Because then Emily suffers too, and your business. You wouldn't betray your own wife, Jack. You love her, don't you? Jack looked at his wife. She stood with downcast eyes, silent. At that moment he didn't yet know her betrayal ran much deeper than it seemed. That between her and the professor lay more than just money. He'd understand that later. Fine, we're all in this together now, and our job is to get home. He zipped his parka. Show me where this beacon is. We'll talk more when we're home. Right here, Stone pointed to a spot on the map. Just walk out and check the signal. We'll prepare the reports meanwhile. Jack stepped into the polar night. Snow crunched underfoot, wind lashed his face. He walked forward toward the indicated point, which sat at the very edge of the polar ice shelf, extending far into the open ocean, not suspecting that behind him Stone was already pulling explosives from his backpack. The first blast was scheduled for 20 minutes. Chapter 6. On Death's Edge. Jack trudged through the snow, feeling the cold penetrate beneath his parka. 50 below wasn't Iraqi heat. Here, cold killed slowly, methodically. First fingers go numb, then comes deceptive warmth, and then… He shook his head, pushing away those thoughts. Right now he needed to think about other things. The GPS coordinates led to a small ice outcrop. Something about its contours seemed wrong, but Jack couldn't pinpoint what exactly. Military intuition, which had saved him so many times in Iraq, now screamed warnings, but he kept walking forward. No choice. A gust of wind carried a sound from the station's direction. Jack turned. In the dim polar twilight, he saw a dark figure moving quickly along his tracks. Professor Stone, and something in his hands. The first explosion caught Jack off guard. Ice beneath his feet shuddered, cracked. The second blast thundered almost immediately from the other side. Now he understood everything. They weren't trying to kill him directly. They wanted the ocean to do it for them. Cracks in the ice sheet spread with frightening speed. The sound resembled gunshots, the same dry crack, only amplified many times. Jack sprinted back, but too late. The huge ice floe he stood on had already separated from the main mass. "Farewell, Captain," Stone's voice carried through the wind's howl. "Nothing personal, just business. Your wife is quite passionate, by the way." Jack watched the professor's dark figure dissolve into the snowy haze. The ice floe beneath his feet moved slowly but inexorably toward open sea. He pulled out his compass. The needle confirmed his worst fears. The current carried him northeast, toward open ocean. The first hour he spent assessing the situation. The floe was fairly large, about 30 by 30 yards, but with each wave impact, new chunks broke away. In a couple hours, half might remain, or less. The radio in his pocket stayed silent, either out of range or deliberately disabled at base. The GPS navigator showed about 2 miles to shore. Under normal conditions, nothing. But not when a strip of water near freezing temperature lay between you and land. Wind intensified. Jack sheltered behind a small pressure ridge, trying to conserve heat. He knew he had only 2 options. First, stay on the floe and slowly die from cold or hunger. Second, try to swim to shore. Both options were deadly, but the second at least offered a ghost of a chance. That's when he heard the snort. 10 yards away at the floe's edge lay a seal, a large male, judging by size. The animal regarded its strange neighbor with curiosity. The thought came instantly. Jack remembered Inuit stories about an ancient survival method in icy water, a method the seals themselves had taught them. The knife slid into his hand as if by itself. He'd have to act fast, there wouldn't be a second chance. The seal was large and strong, but Jack had the advantage of surprise and hand-to-hand combat experience, even if with very different opponents. The struggle was brief and brutal. When it ended, Jack methodically set to work. His hands shook from cold, but he couldn't afford mistakes. Every movement had to be precise. First, remove the parka and other clothes. Pack everything in a waterproof bag. Then, the hardest part. Jack began rubbing seal blubber over his body, carefully covering every inch of skin. This fat was the only thing that could protect him from the water's deadly cold. Cold hit him like a sledgehammer blow. His naked body covered in goosebumps, breathing became ragged. But there was no time to hesitate. The floe continued crumbling. Jack looked at shore, the dark line barely visible in twilight. Somewhere beyond that line of deathly cold water lay land. Life. Hope. He secured the bag of clothes to his back, making sure the knots held. Took a deep breath. Another. Mentally said goodbye to Emily, the Emily he'd loved, who he thought loved him. The one who existed before this day. Then he stepped into the water. The cold was absolute. It pierced his body like 1,000 ice needles. For a moment his lungs seemed crushed in a vice, reflexive shock response. But the seal fat worked. The thin film of animal blubber created at least some protection from the killing cold. Jack swam, trying to maintain steady rhythm. Every movement had to be efficient, wasted energy meant death. Water burned his face, the only part he couldn't protect with fat. It instantly covered with an ice crust. But he kept swimming. Time lost meaning. There was only black water, burning cold, and the dark line of shore ahead. Sometimes he thought he saw polar bears watching from passing floes. Or were they hallucinations from hypothermia? He didn't remember reaching shore. The last yards blurred into one smear of pain and cold. He remembered only his fingers clawing frozen sand, his body refusing to move, consciousness slipping into darkness. His last thought was survived again, like in that burning tank. Then came darkness, and in that darkness he thought he heard voices speaking an unfamiliar language, and warmth, the saving warmth of strangers' hands. Chapter 7: Salvation. Death smelled of sea salt and tasted of Arctic water. Jack was certain of this until he woke and smelled something different: smoke. Not the acrid smoke of fire, not the oily reek of a burning tank, but something ancient like cedar and moss. The smell of life. He opened his eyes. Above stretched a ceiling of reindeer hides pulled taut over wooden poles, a yaranga, traditional dwelling of the northern peoples. He'd seen them in National Geographic as a kid, but never thought he'd wake up inside one. Fire in the central hearth cast dancing shadows on the walls. Somewhere outside, wind howled, the same wind that nearly killed him. Through the smoke hole in the roof, northern lights danced, green and purple bands waltzing across black sky like ghostly spirits. He tried to move, and his body answered with waves of pain. Every muscle, every joint reminded him of that insane swim through icy water. But he was alive. Somehow, miraculously alive. Ah! An involuntary groan escaped his parched throat. Immediately a face appeared, a young woman with almond eyes and long black braids. She couldn't be more than 20. She leaned over him, said something in an unfamiliar language, melodic, with long vowels and soft consonants. When she touched his forehead with a cool palm, Jack realized he'd been burning with fever until now. Her touch anchored him to reality. She brought a wooden cup of some brew to his lips. It smelled of herbs and tasted bitter, but Jack drank greedily, like a desert wanderer. "Jack," he croaked, pointing at himself. The woman smiled. The smile transformed her face, making it like a rising sun. "And you?" So began his new life. Life without words, at least, without understood words. But the Inupiat, as he learned later, had lived for centuries in a world where words meant less than actions. Here, at the edge of the world, where temperatures drop to 60 below and polar night lasts months, only those survive who can read truth in another person's eyes. Later he learned how they found him. Hunters returning with game spotted something dark on the snow. At first they thought a seal, but seals don't wear clothes or bleed on the ice. They brought him to camp nearly dead, with clothes frozen stiff and skin covered in seal fat. The elders said it was a sign. A white man who used their ancient method of surviving icy water was meant to live. They entrusted him to Eniu, the shaman's daughter, who knew secrets of healing herbs and ancient rituals. Days blurred into one endless stream of recovery. Eniu changed dressings, rubbed his body with salves that smelled of tundra herbs, gave him broths to drink. Gradually strength returned, and he began noticing details of camp life. Everything was different here. No locked doors, the yaranga flap always open to guests. No secret deals, hunters shared their catch with the whole tribe. No lies, they simply had no purpose here. How could you lie when your life depended on others' trust? Each morning Jack watched women hang hides to dry, men prepare dog teams for hunting, children play in snow mimicking adults. Simple life, unchanged for hundreds of years. And in this simplicity lay such honesty, such purity, it made his heart ache. He thought of Emily and Stone, of their million-dollar schemes, of how easily they'd decided to kill a man for money, of that artificial world of fake reports and falsified data they'd built. Here, in the Inupiat camp, it all seemed so petty, worthless. Eniu seemed to understand him without words. When dark thoughts overwhelmed him, she simply sat nearby. Sometimes she sang quiet songs in her language, like wind whispering through tundra. Sometimes she just stayed silent, sorting herbs or working on new fur boots. She was beautiful with that special beauty you won't find in glossy magazines. Her movements held natural grace, and her eyes carried some ancient wisdom passed through generations of her people's women. Beside her, Jack felt strange peace, as if after a long storm he'd finally entered a quiet harbor. One evening she brought him new clothes, fur pants and parka sewn by her hands. Every stitch held care, the very thing he'd missed so much in his former life. Helping him dress, she let her hands linger on his shoulders for a moment. Their eyes met, and Jack saw in hers a reflection of the fire already kindling in his own soul. That night they needed no common language. Body language proved older than all human tongues. Her skin smelled of hearth smoke and Arctic herbs. Her kisses were inexpert but sincere, like everything in this world where pretense was impossible. Later, as they lay on fur blankets watching northern lights through the smoke hole, Jack thought about fate's strangeness. How it had led him through Iraqi deserts, through betrayal and icy hell, to bring him here, to this innocent girl, to these people, to this simple and honest life. Eniu laid her head on his chest and sang something quietly. He didn't understand the words but grasped the meaning, here at the edge of the world, where people don't lock doors or betray each other, where truth is valued above gold and love above power. The road back awaited him, to the station, to the traders, to justice. But now he had a reason to return. Eniu slept in his arms, and in the dying fire's light Jack saw a gentle smile on her lips. He didn't know then that this night would change not just his life, but the life of an entire tribe. He simply lay listening to wind howl outside, and for the first time in ages felt truly alive. Chapter 8. Return to Base. The old Inupiat everyone called simply Father spread a map before Jack, a yellowed sheet with faded lines and inscriptions in Russian and English. The map must have remembered Soviet times, when polar stations dotted the entire coast like beacons of a forgotten empire. Long journey, Father said through a young hunter who knew some English words. 4 sons, maybe 5 if blizzard. Jack studied the map, nodding familiar landmarks. The base should be somewhere here, 100 miles northeast. With good weather, a dog team could make it in 3 or 4 days. Eniu stood apart, pretending to busy herself gathering supplies, but Jack saw her stealing glances at him. In the 2 weeks spent at camp, he'd learned to read her face like an open book. Now it showed worry not for herself, for him. The dogs were ready for the long trail, sturdy sled dogs bred by generations of Inupiat for Arctic life. Their breath formed vapor clouds in the frozen air, eyes burning with anticipation. They sensed a big journey coming. Dogs no way, the young hunter explained, showing Jack how to handle the team. Important, trust them. They feel weather, feel danger. If they get nervous, means polar bears nearby or thin ice. Jack nodded, absorbing every word. His life now depended on this knowledge, ancient wisdom of people who'd survived centuries in Earth's harshest conditions. Funny how fate teaches lessons. He, a former tank driver, now had to trust a team of 8 dogs. Just before departure, Eniu brought him a small pouch of reindeer hide. Inside were herbs. Their bitter smell reminded Jack of his first days in the Yaranga, when she'd nursed him after the deadly swim. Medicine, the hunter translated her words. If freeze, brew and drink, helps. She wanted to say more, but words stuck in her throat. Instead, she simply pressed against his chest, so small and fragile in her fur parka. Jack held her, breathing in the familiar smell of smoke and herbs. Already sitting on the sled, he looked back at the camp one last time. Eniu stood by her yaranga, her long braids whipping in the wind. She raised her hand in farewell, and something in that gesture made his heart clench. He didn't yet know her little secret. Hike, the short command, and the dogs lunged forward. The first day's travel passed relatively easy. Weather stayed clear, dogs ran steady, and sledding skills came surprisingly natural. Maybe it was tank driving experience, the same sense of movement, same need to read terrain. At rest stops, Jack pulled out the map, checked against the handmade compass the Inupiat had given him. The main thing was not to lose direction. In this white wasteland, getting lost was easy. One mistake could cost a life. By evening of the second day, weather began deteriorating. Wind picked up, sky filled with gray haze. The dogs grew restless, constantly looking around. Jack remembered the warning, if dogs worry, something's wrong. He made camp earlier than usual, constructing a shelter from the sled and canvas. The dogs huddled in a tight circle, warming each other. In the wind's howling, Jack thought he heard voices, maybe ghosts of those who couldn't survive the Arctic night. Morning of the third day brought a blizzard. Visibility dropped to yards, wind hurled stinging snow at his face. But Jack pressed on. He knew somewhere ahead waited answers. And justice. The base appeared suddenly. One moment just a dark shape emerged through the snowy veil. Everything was as he remembered, the tilting barracks half buried in snow, the bent antenna on the roof. Only the vehicle tracks had long since been covered. Inside was cold and empty. Dust and frost covered the old instruments. Wind whistled through gaps between boards. Jack methodically searched the rooms until he found what he sought, the radio station. His heart beat faster. Finally, he could call for help, report his coordinates to authorities, and escape this frozen hell. But when he switched on power, the speaker answered only with static hiss. The transmitter was broken neatly and professionally. Stone and his wife had anticipated this possibility. Jack cursed, all his plans crumbled. Then through the static came a signal. Apparently the professor had only broken transmission, but reception still worked. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. SOS. The classic distress signal every sailor and polar explorer knows. Jack pressed his ear to the receiver, listening for coordinates. The signal came from the northwest, about 50 miles away. And the source was very familiar, the same Haglund vehicle Stone and Emily had escaped in. "Got you bastards. Seems without my skills you couldn't handle the machine," Jack whispered, pulling out the map. They were stuck somewhere in the wilderness, unable to move further. Knowing their level of Arctic preparedness, they had maybe a couple days before cold and hunger did their work. Jack looked at the dogs. They'd rested and were ready for another push. He still had Eniu's brew in his flask, supplies in the sled. He could just leave them there, let nature deliver its justice. That would be fair. But then he remembered Eniu's face, her kindness and her people's wisdom. Remembered how the Inupiat saved him, asking no questions. In their world there was no place for revenge, only mercy and justice. "Hike," he commanded the dogs, turning the team northwest. Somewhere out there in the snowy wasteland, this story's climax awaited. He didn't know then what he'd find in the stuck vehicle, didn't know what other betrayals would be revealed. He simply did what he had to do, as the Inupiat taught him, as Eniu taught him. The dogs surged forward, pulling the sled into white emptiness. A new blizzard was starting, but that didn't frighten Jack anymore. He knew, to find truth, sometimes you have to go through the storm. Chapter 9, Reckoning. Jack found the Haglund vehicle at dawn on the third day. It was stuck in a deep crevasse, like a scar on the white face of the tundra. The machine's orange paint had dulled under a layer of frost, the tracks frozen solid in ice. The dogs sensed it first. They began sniffing nervously and pulling to the side. Jack stopped the team at a safe distance. Something about this scene felt wrong. Too quiet. Even for the Arctic, too quiet. He pulled out binoculars, a gift from an old hunter in the tribe. The machine sat at an angle, as if it had tried to escape the trap and frozen halfway. Tracks in the snow told of several attempts to break free, deep grooves from the treads, scattered gravel usually placed under wheels for better traction. But now it all formed a single monolith, seized by frost. "Wait here," he told the dogs, though they showed no inclination to move. As he approached the vehicle, the picture grew grimmer. The cabin windows were covered with thick ice from inside, a bad sign. Meant there'd been no heat inside for a long time. The exhaust pipe was clear of snow. They'd tried to keep the engine running to the last. Jack knocked on the side door. Something stirred inside, a weak voice came. "Help, please." Inside the Haglund, air was so cold that breath turned to ice crystals. His flashlight beam pulled two figures from the darkness. They sat huddled together under a pile of blankets and jackets. Emily shivered, her lips tinged blue. Stone looked little better, his always groomed silver beard covered in frost, fear frozen in his eyes. "God, Jack," Emily's voice trembled. "Is it really you? We thought, we were sure that I was dead." He let bitterness seep into his voice. "Sorry to disappoint." "Look, Captain," Stone tried to inject his usual professorial confidence into his voice but failed. "I understand you might be upset, even angry with us, but now's not the time for what, Professor? For truth." Something in his tone made them both fall silent. In the vehicle's cramped space, silence hung, broken only by wind howling outside and ice pellets hitting the metal shell. "How long have you been here?" Jack asked, surveying empty food cans. 8 days, Emily whispered. Food ran out yesterday." Her voice broke and suddenly it all poured out. "Jack, forgive me for everything. I'm such a fool, such a blind idiot." Tears froze on her cheeks. "I didn't want you dead, I swear. When you left to check that beacon, I didn't even know about the explosives. But you knew about everything else." His voice was quiet, almost gentle, which made it more frightening. "Why, yes," she sobbed. "About the money, the fake reports. About what else, Emily?" Stone jerked. "Don't." "Quiet," Jack roared with such force that both flinched. "I want to hear everything, now." And Emily told him. About 15 years with Stone, starting back in university. About how he charmed her, a young, ambitious student with his intellect and power. How he'd drawn her into his schemes. How their scientific work became a money-laundering operation. And all this time, Jack felt something cold and terrible growing inside. All these years of our marriage. "I loved you," she cried out. "I really loved you, but I got confused." She tried to stand but cried out in pain. Jack noticed her feet swollen, clearly frostbitten. Without immediate help, she'd lose them. "Captain," Stone spoke up. Wheedling notes entered his tone. "I understand your feelings, but right now the main thing is survival. You have dogs, supplies, we can." Jack laughed and both flinched again at that laugh. "You really think after everything?" "Please," Emily reached out to him. "For what we had between us. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but if you leave Stone to die here, how are you better than him?" She shook now, not just from cold. Hysteria had begun. Jack looked at the woman he'd once loved and felt strange emptiness inside. Then remembered Eniu, her kindness, her wisdom, her people who saved him without asking questions. "Fine," he said finally. "The nearest settlement is about 4 days' journey, if we leave at dawn tomorrow." "Thank you," Emily exhaled. "Thank you, I." "Don't thank me yet," he cut her off. "First we need to survive this night." He settled the dogs in relative shelter behind the vehicle, fed them. Returning inside, he saw Emily shaking harder. "If we don't warm her, she won't last till morning," Stone said matter-of-factly, as if discussing some scientific experiment. Jack silently spread his sleeping bag next to Emily. She looked at him with distrust and hope simultaneously. "Just to keep you from freezing," he said dryly. "Nothing more." The night dragged endlessly. Emily gradually warmed in his arms, stopped shivering. Sometimes she whimpered in sleep, mumbled something about forgiveness. Stone sat opposite, leaning against the wall, pretending to doze, but Jack felt his gaze. He dozed toward morning when the sky beyond frozen windows began to gray. He woke to strange silence. The dogs weren't making noise. Sat up sharply, Stone was gone. Rushed outside, the sled had vanished along with the team. The old fox had calculated everything. Waited for Jack to fall asleep, grabbed the supplies and dogs, leaving them to die in the frozen vehicle. Tracks led north but quickly disappeared in the rising blizzard. Returning to the machine, he saw despair in Emily's eyes. She understood everything without words. "He abandoned us," she whispered, "like the worst." She didn't finish. Outside came a strange sound, as if something heavy fell on snow, then a guttural roar, and a human scream high, full of terror. Polar bears. Jack knew they roamed these parts. He'd seen their tracks yesterday but hadn't paid attention. Now he understood Stone had seen them too. That's why he'd fled, hoping the predators would busy themselves with the stuck vehicle while he escaped. The screams died quickly. An hour later the blizzard eased slightly, and Jack could scout. What he found half a mile north had once been Professor Michael Stone. Now it was just remains on bloodied snow next to torn sleds. The dogs had scattered, their tracks divided and disappeared in different directions. Smart animals, sensing bears, they'd broken their traces and saved themselves. People sometimes prove stupider than dogs. Jack gathered what remained of the professor in a plastic bag, then returned to the vehicle. Everything should have ended here, but not as the traitors planned. Differently. He still had one chance. The explosive charges from the base lay in his backpack, if he placed them correctly around the frozen tracks. Emily silently watched him prepare for the blast. Her eyes held no pleas or hope anymore, only acceptance. An understanding that whatever this story's ending, the past couldn't be recovered. Jack set the last charge, looked east, where beyond the snowy veil the sun was rising. Somewhere there lay the Inupiat camp in Eniu. He began unwinding the fuse. Time to finish this story. Chapter 10, Coming Home. The explosion thundered like a tank cannon shot. Ice around the vehicle cracked like giant glass under a hammer blow. Jack was already in the cabin when the last echoes died in the Arctic air. Key in ignition, gas pedal to the floor. The engine coughed, spat black smoke, again and again. On the fourth try it finally came alive, hoarse, labored but alive. The tracks scraped against broken ice. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, but the machine began climbing from the ice trap. Emily lay in the vehicle's rear, wrapped in every blanket they could find. Her feet. Jack tried not to think about her feet. The main thing now was reaching civilization. The nearest town lay about 200 miles away, 2, maybe 3 days' travel if weather permitted. Weather didn't permit. The blizzard hit them 6 hours after starting. Sky and earth merged into one white maelstrom. Visibility dropped to yards. GPS showed they were moving south, but Jack was no longer sure electronics could be trusted in these conditions. "Forgive me," Emily's voice barely carried over the wind's howl and engine's roar. "Forgive me for everything." "Be quiet," he cut her off. "I need to concentrate." But she couldn't stay quiet. Words poured from her like pus from an old wound. "I really loved you at first, really. But then, it's like a drug, you understand. Money, power, secret meetings. Stone knew which buttons to push. He knew how to make a person feel special. And then decided to get rid of you once you became a burden." Jack peered into the white haze ahead. "Left you to die in the vehicle. Romantic, I must say." She sobbed. "You know what's worst? I wasn't even surprised. Somewhere deep inside I always knew he was capable of this. Just didn't want to believe." Fuel ran out late on the second day. They'd covered about two-thirds of the way to Fairbanks. The engine coughed one last time and died. In the sudden silence, the blizzard's howl seemed especially loud. "That's it?" Emily asked. "This is the end?" Jack checked the radio for the 100th time. Through static, fragments of conversations sometimes broke through, meant they were already in civilian frequency range. He began transmitting distress signals over and over. Help came 18 hours later. First they heard the helicopters roar, then saw search spotlights flickering through the snowy veil. Rescuers appeared like ghosts in white suits, with medical equipment and thermoses of hot tea. They took Emily first. Her feet had blackened with gangrene, needed urgent surgery. Jack watched the helicopter rise into the sky, carrying away his past life, and felt strange emptiness. At the hospital, more than doctors waited for them. FBI agents also took interest in the story of the missing scientific expedition, especially interested in documents Jack had grabbed from the base before heading out to find the vehicle. Everything spun like a kaleidoscope. Interrogations, testimonies, examinations. The entire grant scheme unraveled, millions of dollars vanished into nowhere. Fake equipment reports that never existed, bribes to grant committee officials. The story hit the papers. Arctic fraud, scientist swindlers, corruption in academic circles. Headlines screamed sensation. The University of Alaska found itself at the scandal's center. Emily lost both legs below the knee. Gangrene had gone too far. Doctors could do nothing. When Jack came to her room, the only and last time, she didn't even turn her head. "I'm filing for divorce," he said, standing at the door. "I know," her voice was lifeless. "Is it because of my betrayal, or have you found someone else?" "Both. Is she a good person?" "Better than either of us." Emily finally turned to him. Her eyes held no tears, only endless weariness. "You know, right now, I think I should have died in that vehicle." Jack left the room without a word. In his pocket lay divorce papers and a ticket for a small charter plane that would drop him at the Inupiat camp, to NU. But first he needed to finish all formalities. Give final testimony, sign papers, put an end to this story of lies and betrayal. Leaving the hospital, he turned up his jacket collar against a gust of icy wind. Somewhere beyond that wind, a new life waited. Simple and honest, like the people who saved him from death. Like the girl who nursed him and gave her heart, asking nothing in return. Snow began falling the season's first. White flakes drifted slowly onto the gray city, as if trying to cover its sins with a white blanket of oblivion. But Jack knew some stains couldn't be washed away even by Arctic snow. He caught a taxi and gave his lawyer's address. He needed to hurry. In 2 days a plane waited. Chapter 11, New Path. The little Beaver aircraft buzzed like an angry bumblebee, fighting through wind gusts. The snowy wasteland below seemed endless, a white canvas marked by cloud shadows. Jack sat with his forehead pressed to the icy window, thinking about life's strange turns. A month ago he'd walked here on foot, trying to survive. Now he returned, no longer a fugitive, but a man who'd found his path. "Can't go further," the pilot shouted over the engine roar. "See those hills? Your friends are somewhere there. If we're lucky, they'll spot the plane." Jack nodded. He knew the Inupiat had already spotted them. For people who'd lived by hunting for centuries, any sound, any movement in the sky went noticed. The plane landed on a relatively flat area. Snow swirled from the propeller. Before Jack could unload his backpack, dots appeared on the horizon, hunters on snowmobiles. They materialized from the white wasteland like spirits of this ancient land. They recognized him immediately. The young hunter, the same one who taught him to drive the dog team, jumped off his snowmobile and embraced him firmly. Words weren't needed. A handshake, a smile, a nod toward camp. Welcome home. Eniu waited at the Yaranga entrance. She stood motionless as a statue, only her long braids whipping in the wind. As Jack approached, he noticed changes, the barely visible roundness of her belly beneath the fur parka, a special gleam in her eyes. She knew, and knew he would return. Their embrace was long. She smelled of hearth smoke, herbs, and something else, that special scent of life growing within her. Jack dropped to his knees, pressed his cheek to her belly. He couldn't tell her in words how much this meant to him, but she didn't need words. The following days merged into one endless moment of happiness. The camp accepted him as their own, simply and naturally, without unnecessary ceremony. The elders blessed his union with Eniu. The shaman performed an ancient ritual calling on tundra spirits to protect the unborn child. Life in the tribe flowed by its own laws, unchanged for centuries. Each morning hunters left for game. Women tended households, children played in snow mimicking adults. Jack learned everything. How to track caribou by barely visible signs, how to predict weather by cloud shapes, how to make tools from bone and wood. In the evenings they sat by the hearth, and Eniu taught him her people's language. The words were complex, unfamiliar to his tongue, but he tried. Each learned word bridged his past life and new reality. Their son was born on the year's longest night. The old midwife delivered him, the same who'd done this for 3 generations of the tribe. When the baby's first cry sounded, northern lights flared above the camp, green and purple flashes danced in the sky, as if welcoming a new person. Jack held his son and saw both people's features in his face, his mother's almond eyes and his straight nose, the Inupiat's dark skin and his sandy hair. A small bridge between 2 worlds. "What shall we name him?" he asked Eniu in her language. Over the past months he'd learned enough to express what mattered most. She smiled and spoke a name, an ancient name of her people, meaning one who came with the first snow. Jack repeated it, feeling how it settled on his tongue right, as if it had always been part of his life. Sometimes, on especially cold nights when wind howled through the Yaranga's gaps, Jack thought about his past. About the burning tank in Iraq, Emily's betrayal, that insane swim through the icy ocean. Each trial, each pain had led him here, to this woman, to this child, to this simple and honest life. One morning he saw a smoke column on the horizon. Somewhere another scientific expedition passed. Maybe again with fake reports and stolen millions. But now it wasn't his concern. His world had shrunk to the camp's borders, to his Yaranga's warmth, to his son's smile and Eniu's embrace. In spring, when the sun finally rose above the horizon after the long polar night, he and his son sat on a hill near camp. The boy played with a bone toy Jack had carved for him, while his father looked east where the horizon line melted away. "There's a big world out there, son," he said in English, though the boy didn't understand words yet. "A complicated world. Someday you'll learn about it, but here is our home." Eniu called them for dinner. Jack picked up his son and walked to the Yaranga where the hearth burned, and the woman who'd given him new life waited. Behind them remained their footprints in the snow, large and small, intertwining like threads of fate. And above the tundra, northern lights flared again, indifferent to human dramas, eternal as the Arctic night itself. In its light, the future seemed as clean and clear as the untouched snow around the camp. If you enjoyed this story, please support the author with a like, subscribe to the channel, and share your emotions in the comments. Thank you.